Here in this sanctuary, we acknowledge that we are on the historic homelands of the various bands of Cahuilla people, and we honor the unique relationship that we hope emerges between our community and the indigenous people and their traditional territory. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Cahuilla people whose lands and water we benefit from. In this congregation, we welcome people of all sexual orientations and gender identity, of all ages and sizes, people of all economic statures and professions, civic engagement, and of all physical and mental ability, people of all races and ancestries and cultures. We welcome you wherever you come from, whoever you love, whatever your immigration status. We welcome all those who will learn and grow with us as we commit together to embrace the rich and beautiful diversity of the world and to build a community centered in justice, compassion, and love. You are welcome here, and we are very glad you're with us this morning. It is important to us here in this community to create a safe and healthy environment for everyone who gathers in worship, including those who are immunocompromised or have other risk factors. Our COVID protocols about vaccination and mask use are in place because we wish to do everything we can to protect all of us. A reminder that masks covering your mouth and your nose are required to attend in-person worship, preferably KN95 masks. If you arrive without one, we have some available at the welcome desk. Please choose to act for the health and safety of our community. Our service is always available streamed on our website if you need to observe from home. If you would like to be on our email list to learn more about us and our programming, please contact us at admin, that's ADMIN, at uucod.org, or visit our beautiful new website, uucod.org. And we thank Fran Hogue for all of her hard work. We have a couple of announcements. Bridge starts this week, and if you are interested in learning or playing, please contact Derek Moore. His information is in the directory. Our annual auction, our biggest fundraiser of the year, is coming up in November. Carol Lavoie, where's Carol? Thank you very much. Our auction goddess needs help, so please send her an email asking what you can do. Also, the auction forms are available in the weekly newsletter and on the table in the foyer. There are always great items on which to bid, so plan on participating in some way. You'll be glad you did. It's a lot of fun, and we all need to have more fun. Finally, I, yours truly, will be leading a discussion of the book For You When I'm Gone, starting on September 16th here in the community room. Information is in the weekly newsletter, or contact me. And now we will ring our Tibetan bowl to begin our service and listen to our music for centering.
Good morning. I am the Reverend Ian Riddell, and I have the honor and delight of serving this congregation as its minister. However you found us, however many times you've been here with us in person or online, welcome. We are a congregation and a tradition that celebrates the richness and beauty of individual lives and commits to working together to weave a tapestry made stronger and more vibrant by our collaboration and by sharing of our lives and our visions for a thriving future for all life. We strive together to build the beloved community of resilience, hope, and love in the face of fear and apathy. We practice the opening of hearts, the working of hands, and the lifting of spirits in the service of love. And we share the sacred breath. We gather together to build this beloved community breath by breath, word by word, note by note, step by step. We gather together to sing and speak and breathe and dance the beloved community into being. This is our work. This is our calling. This is our joy. Welcome to worship today. We're going to start by singing number 1023, Building Bridges. The words will be on the screen, and I think it's been a while since we've done this one. So I'm going to sing a line to you, and I'm going to have you sing it back to me, and we're going to work our way through it, and then we'll sing it all together. You can remain seated for this one. It goes like this. Building bridges between our divisions. Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions. With all of our voices and all of our visions. Friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Friends, we could make such sweet harmony. So we're going to sing that all through together, and as you feel comfortable, join on in. Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions. Friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions. Friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Once more. Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions. Friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Thank you very much. One day, 4 parts.
Please join with me for our chalice lighting and unison aspiration. May love be the spirit of this church. May the quest for truth be its sacrament and service be its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, and to help one another in fellowship. This is our aspiration.
Now, as Bryna lights the candles, I invite you to join me as we share our BIPOC candle lighting. We light these candles in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color as they journey towards spiritual wholeness. May we, as a beloved community, work to dismantle racism and all forms of oppression. May we live out our principles so that justice, dignity, and equity for all prevail. We will now take it. They won't light. Technical difficulties are not limited to electronics. We are now going to take an offering for the support and the thriving of this congregation and its work in our hearts, in our world. If the ushers would come forward, please.
Today's reading is an excerpt from a speech Dr. Martin Luther King gave at the 4th Constitutional Convention of the AFL-CIO in Miami Beach on December 11, 1961. Though spoken more than 50 years ago and using the gendered language of the time, King's call to realize that the dream of the beloved community involved economic as well as racial justice. It is important for us to hear this today. Differences have been contrived by outsiders who seek to impose disunity by dividing brothers because of the color of their skin has a different shade. I look forward confidently to the day when all who work for a living will be one, with no thought of their separateness as Negroes, Jews, Italians, or any other distinction. This will be the day when we shall bring into full realization the dream of American democracy, a dream yet unfulfilled, a dream of equality of opportunity, of privilege, and property widely distributed, a dream of a land where men will not take necessities from the many to give to the luxuries of the few, a dream of a land where men will not argue that the color of a man's skin determines the content of his character. A dream of a nation where all our gifts and resources are held not for ourselves alone, but as instruments of service for the rest of humanity. The dream of a country where every man will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. That is the dream. As we struggle to make racial and economic justice a reality, let us maintain faith in the future. At times, we confront difficult and frustrating moments in the struggle to make justice a reality, but we must believe that somehow that these problems can be solved.
This is the time in our service where we take a moment to share the joys and sorrows, the pain and the triumphs in our own hearts and in the hearts of our neighbors. This morning, Rod Belsheet lights a candle of gratitude for Jerry. Jerry is an amazing stealth contributor to our beautiful grounds. Months ago, he led the charge to upgrade our gardening service, and since that time, he has frequently been at church early in the morning, watering, trimming, and giving whatever care is needed. He's always here before I get here. Thank you, Jerry. The place looks great. Barb and Sarita light a candle for their brother-in-law, Shelby Jacobs, who has entered hospice, and for our sister Elizabeth, they write, as she deals with this sad moment. Light a candle of easy healing wishes to Margaret Beeman and Jim Swanson following their surgeries. And a candle of great thanks, many thanks, for our volunteers that do so much to support our community and keep us moving forward. And we know that there are joys and sorrows that are held in the silence of our own hearts, quietly waiting there for the moment when they are ready to be shared. And dear friends, we pause at this time in our service to honor our companion in the faith, Diana Ressler, who died on August 18th at home in the loving presence of her family. We share our love with John and their family today. Each of us will honor Diana's life in our own way, and you might choose to spend a moment with her artwork, which is displayed in our social hall. We will no longer hear the sound of her voice or her laughter, see the twinkle in her eyes, or feel the touch of her hands. And yet we know her spirit lives in all of those she touched on her life's journey. So from our chalice of memory and hope and community, we have lit this candle to symbolize how her influence will go on shining in all of us. In mystery we are born. In mystery we live, and in mystery we die. Will you pause with me now for a moment of quiet reflection, contemplation, as we sit in the presence of the love that is in our hearts, in this space, in our spirits, and in our hope. We breathe in quiet together. May all beings know peace. May all beings know an end to suffering. May all beings know love. Will you join your voices together now as we remain seated and sing our hymns for meditation, Spirit of Life and Fuente de Amor. I've been working on the railroad all the livelong day. I've been working on the railroad just to pass the time away. Can't you hear the whistle blowing? Rise up so early in the morn. Can't you hear the captain shouting? Dinah, blow your horn. We'll stop there. Thank you. Now that is the song of a railway worker, lamenting the life he led, rising up early in the morning and working all the livelong day, building the railroads that would stretch from sea to sea and allow for the political and economic unification of this country. Life was not easy for those thought of as the laboring classes, and in the 1880s and 90s were a period of growing labor unrest around the country. President Grover Cleveland and his government were not known for their compassionate or gentle responses to strikes. In 1894, when the workers for the Pullman Railway Company in Illinois responded to layoffs and poor working conditions with a strike. Supported nationwide by Eugene Debs and the American Railway Union, Cleveland responded by sending 12,000 soldiers to put down the strike. And in the wake of this and other strikes, a bill to create a federal Labor Day was introduced and passed by both the House and the Senate just after the end of the Pullman unrest. This bill followed those in several states which had created local commemorations and celebrations of labor in the years before this. And despite his displayed lack of sympathy for striking workers, Cleveland, who was seeking re-election, signed the bill into law, and our current Labor Day holiday was born. From the great industrial flourishing of this country in the 19th century to the anguish of the Great Depression in the 1930s, to the troubles witnessed to by Dr. King and others in the 60s and 70s to this very day, and the struggles of essential workers during the pandemic. Throughout all of this time, as a nation, we have been in constant struggle to demand and ensure that the lives and rights of workers are not trampled during the quest for profits and progress. Reverend Dr. King's words, spoken more than 50 years ago now, with his dream of a land where necessities would not be taken away from the many to give luxuries to the few, those words ring true to this day as we continue our struggle for economic justice. Because there are twin notions that if you work hard, you'll make it big, and if you're not making it big, then you're not working hard enough. These notions, unfortunately, are at the heart of some people's deepest notion of what this country is and can be. That American dream, with all of its hope and possibility, is rooted in those ideas. Now, there have been always, of course, voices that have argued against this idea that poverty is simply the symptom of laziness and wealth the result of hard work. I want to highlight one group actively drawing attention to economic injustice and the roots of the concentration of wealth. They're called resource generation. And this is a group of young people, all under the age of 35, who recognize that their families are part of the 1%. These are the children of wealthy families who are committed to finding ways to raise awareness of economic inequality and to use their resources to shift the system. A few years ago, Resource Generation created an action across the country to publicly draw attention to the way our system is constructed. It was called Pie Day. And it was fun and tasty, too. On tax day, members of Resource Generation went out into the streets with pie, lots of pie, and handed it out to passers-by, as they then took an opportunity to talk with them about how wealth in this country is divvied up. For this, they used, you guessed it, pie charts made of actual pie. With these pies, they showed how wealth is distributed unevenly and how the wealth in the stock market and investments is distributed even more unevenly. All of this was to get across the point that while investment wealth and earnings from work are both taxed in this country, in theory, they have historically been taxed at very different rates. Income from work is taxed on a relatively progressive scale. Simplistically put, the more income, the higher the tax rate, in theory. Investment wealth, such as that held in stocks, was taxed at a flat rate of 15%. This was about 10 years ago they were doing this. Our tax policy, they told people on the street, rewards wealth over work, with the effect that, according to one study by the Congressional Budget Office in 2011, the share of after-tax household income for the top 1% of the population more than doubled, climbing to 17% in 2007 from nearly 8% in 1979. So that's the top 1% of households bring in 17% of the income, or get 17% of the income. While people in the lowest fifth of the population received about 5% of after-tax household income in 2007, down from 7% in 1979. In 1920, that number had declined even further. The lowest 5% of the population received 3% of the income in the country, while the top 1%, 27% of the income. Another voice speaking out against the injustice of the economic system and the lie that poverty was an individual fault was the Reverend John Haynes Holmes, founding member of the NAACP and the ACLU, and a Unitarian minister. Holmes had this to say about poverty. Poverty in this age, as in every age in our country, as in every country, is primarily due to the fact of social injustice, that taxes are inequitable, throwing the chief burden upon the poor instead of upon the rich, that natural resources are in the hands of a few instead of under the control of society at large, and are exploited for the benefit of the few and not for the sake of the common welfare, that the distribution of wealth is grossly unfair and disproportionate. In the final analysis, that society is organized upon a basis of injustice and not of justice, and is permeated, he said, by the spirit of selfishness and not of love. He said these things in 1912. Like the members of Resource Generation decades later, Holmes recognized that social inequity and not individual ability or industry was the root cause of poverty in our society. Despite occasional exceptional rags to riches stories, the system of laws and taxes functioned to help the rich get richer and keep everyone else in their place. Now, I've been jumping all over time and history. That might be a little disorienting, I'm sorry. But I'm doing it for a reason. It is true that there has been great progress over time in the struggle for labor safety and worker rights. We do not live in the era of Pullman strikes. We actually have a minimum wage, low as it is, and industrial safety standards, imperfect and inadequate as they may be. But to rest on those laurels and not see the system in which we live or the work that needs still to be done or the vigilance necessary to maintain the standards we do have now is dangerous and irresponsible. We can see what happens when we don't pay attention to what is going on. We only have to read the newspaper or watch the news during the turmoil of the last few pandemic years, the last few weeks, to know that that is true. Another more personal story. It's a story that has had a profound effect on the vision I have for us as people of religious conviction in the world. I worked for a time as a shift supervisor in a fast food restaurant. I did this during the summers while I was at college, working mostly for money to pay for meals out and movies and other non-essentials during the school year. I am now well aware of my privilege in having a family that could afford to pay for my tuition and room and board. I knew I was lucky, and I appreciated it. I can't say I really enjoyed the work I was doing, but I know that doing it meant a much more enjoyable and comfortable semester or two at school. I also knew, though I'll admit to forgetting it now and again, that most of the people I worked with and supervised were working for a very different purpose. They worked at that restaurant to pay their rent and buy food and clothing and medicine for their families. I say that I am now aware of my privilege. Back then, in my early 20s, I was less so, I will admit. But one day during my first summer as a supervisor, something happened that shook me enough to start me rethinking. It was a busy lunch hour on a Saturday, and the restaurant was full of families of tourists and locals out shopping and enjoying the warm weather. Lines were quite long, so the customers had lots of time to peruse the menu board, which described the food we offered and listed all of the condiments that were on each different kind of burger. One gentleman with a large family waiting at a table stood in line to be served by one of our full-time cashiers, Nancy. I often wonder what his day had been like before that. He got to the counter and ordered a substantial amount of food to feed his family. A few minutes later, I handed him a tray piled with hamburgers and French fries, and one of the other staff carried the family's drinks to the table. A minute after that, the man pushed his way back through the lines and stood right in front of Nancy, clearly very angry, with 2 unwrapped hamburgers in his hands. He yelled at her that he did not want the pickles and ketchup on one of the burgers and the onions on the other. He yelled at her that she had given him the wrong food. So Nancy apologized that he hadn't gotten what he wanted, despite the fact that he hadn't mentioned any of these needs, when he was ordering the hamburgers in the first place, and held her hands out to take back the offending burgers so she could begin the process of replacing them. He threw them at her chest. I don't remember the exact sequence of events after that moment. I know that our manager intervened and worked to get the customer and his family out of the restaurant as quickly as possible. I know that Nancy must have gone back to the kitchen to replace her ketchup-stained apron. And I know that 10 minutes later, the lunch rush continued with Nancy back at her register doing the cheerful and excellent job she always did. And I know that I caught Nancy's eye the next morning as she arrived, early as usual, for her shift after dropping her small daughter off at preschool. As she clocked in, she looked up at me and I saw sadness and fierceness and a little bit of, "What are you going to do?" in her eyes. She put on her apron, freshly washed, took her till and went back to work her shift again at the counter. I do know that I never saw the work that we were doing in that restaurant, or more importantly, the people who were doing that work, in the same way as I had when I began that summer. I vowed to strive to never throw a hamburger, even figuratively. Even figuratively. I can't say I've always succeeded in that task, but I strive each and every day to see human beings in front of me in every encounter. Well, what does that story have to do with what we're talking about? Here's what I learned from Nancy and her assailant. This system that sets up wealth over work, that values and protects and supports one over the other, is not just in our tax codes, it's in our heart. When we don't see value in the work being done around us, by cashiers, and cooks, and dishwashers, by bus drivers and housekeepers, and accountants, by teachers and nurses and receptionists, when we treat the people doing this work the way we treat ATMs and cars and VCRs, well, then we have lost something vital, and we are not living up to or into the values we profess so loudly. We have, as a society and individuals, experienced the disruption wreaked by the pandemic and our response to it over the past few years. And the experience has not been equal. For many of us, it meant that we couldn't get out and about to run our errands or enjoy the world around us. For many of us, it meant difficulty getting access to medical care and medications, barriers to procuring the staples of life, food and paper goods and home supply. For many of us, it meant facing up to the realities of an unequal health system that disadvantaged minority communities. For many of us, it meant that our school-age children were home with us while we were working from home as well, because schools and offices alike had closed down and shifted those activities to our homes. And for many people, the disruptions to their work were more severe. Layoffs, furloughs, businesses shutting down temporarily or permanently. Today I'm thinking especially of two groups of people. I'm thinking of healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, specialists, administrators, extra shifts, overcrowding, demoralizing responses from government institutions, exhaustions, and exposure to a deadly disease. All of my friends who are nurses are still exhausted, demoralized, and angry. And I'm thinking about the other folk who had to keep working, those essential workers, as we called them, in grocery stores and factories, in fast food restaurants and convenience stores and pharmacies, the Uber drivers and delivery people who brought us our food and our groceries, people who had no choice but to keep working outside the home despite the threat of infection and anxiety and fear all around them. We see these people as essential workers, we say. A few days ago, sadly, the author Barbara Ehrenreich passed away. Ehrenreich is best known for her 2001 book, Nickeled and Dimed, on not getting by in America. The book chronicled the experience of living as a low-wage worker in our country, and I want to share a longish passage with you from her book. She wrote, "When someone works for less pay than she can live on, when, for example, she goes hungry so that you can eat more cheaply and conveniently, then she has made a great sacrifice for you. She has made you a gift of some part of her abilities, her health, and her life. The working poor, as they are approvingly termed, are in fact the major philanthropists of our society. They neglect their own children so that the children of others will be cared for. They live in substandard housing so that other homes will be shiny and perfect. They endure privation so that inflation will be low and stock prices high. To be a member of the working poor is to be an anonymous donor, a nameless benefactor to everyone else. And the only thing I would add to that is that it sounds like when she's writing that people do this willingly and intentionally, instead of splitting into a system that we have all constructed. On this day, when we are reminded by the importance of labor in all of our lives, how can we best live out our values? What are we called to do? I think the values we espouse, our understanding of each human being as inherently worthy and dignified, our claims to work for justice and equity and world community, these values really give us little room but to closely examine the choices we make as we move through the social, political, and economic world. We must pay attention to the impact we can have individually and as communities on the economic realities of our time. My goal today is not to tell you what to do, but to ask us all to be aware and awake, and to ask ourselves and each other's questions. Questions sparked for me today by the Pullman workers and by the resource generation and by Nancy, the cashier. Where do we buy our food? And do we know how it's farmed? Do we know how those who do the backbreaking work of harvesting it are treated? How are they paid? Are their rights honored by their employers? And what of those who pack the food or drive the trucks or work at the stores where we buy it? Where do we buy our clothing? Who makes it? How are they treated and paid? When we eat at a restaurant, how are the staff there treated by the owners and managers, by the customers? Are they paid a living wage? How will it affect their emotional lives to know that they are dependent on your goodwill when the time comes to tip them? When we vote, at the local, state, and federal levels, do we know where those who are asking for our vote stand on these issues? Do they vote to protect workers? Do they support the honoring of all work? Do they support programs and policies and tax codes that provide compassion and equity, or those which protect wealth, even if it's our wealth? Don't assume that because the person you are looking at is from one party or the other or another, that they do or don't share your values on these issues. Ask. We've got to ask ourselves these questions and then make our decisions about how we move through the world. And I think that when we see the world clearly with love and justice and humility in our hearts, we come to a place where we are called to respect all work and all those who do it. Respect it by treating those who work for us or with us with dignity and compassion, seeing them as human beings worthy of relationship and not just means to our end. Respect it by compensating people for their work at a level that means they can feed and clothe and educate and house their families and keep them healthy. Respect it by asking our legislators to enact laws to ensure fair compensation and the protection of rights of workers. Respect it by insisting that our laws respect the safety, dignity, and rights of all workers, from heart surgeons to dishwashers, from pilots to garbage collectors. Respect it by demanding of employers that they obey these laws and honor the rights of those who work for and with them to organize themselves for their own protection. It is a profoundly difficult and complex task. I know that. I struggle it with myself every day. I struggle in my heart between convenience and ease and tiredness and my understanding that how I spend my money and where and how I contribute to the culture and governing of my community matters deeply. It's hard work. But we can gain inspiration and hope by remembering in our minds and our hearts and our actions that the people we encounter each and every day are our kin, our neighbors, in so many ways, and that we are called from our very source to choose love at every turn. May it be so. I will invite you now to rise in body or spirit as we sing our closing hymn together, Step by Step, the Longest March. This one may be a little unfamiliar as well, but we're just going to sing it through 3 times, and it's not a hard song. So rise, please, in body and spirit.
Please join with me as we extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
As Bryna shared earlier in the service, Reverend Dr. King said, as we struggle to make racial and economic justice a reality, let us maintain faith in the future. At times, we confront difficult and frustrating moments in the struggle to make justice a reality, but we must believe somehow that these problems can be solved. As we return to our day-to-day lives, may we hear the call to honor the work of all, to pay attention to the ways in which our daily lives rely on the work of so many others. And may we not just pay attention, but speak and act, resist and strive for change toward a future of justice, fairness, and love. Go in peace, friends, to love, serve the world.